Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. I had an interview very early this morning at about 6:30 on the BBC Newsday with Nuala and Alan, and it was about the BRICS, the EU and Africa, very early in the morning, and I took a photograph. I think it was 6:30 when I was seated there waiting for the interview. Of course, there's a lot of interest around the appointment of a new EU commissioner and the BRICS summit in Brazil, and I'll come to that in a moment. But I really think Africa needs to remain as multilateral as possible. I don't think it's a question of either or, it's a question of all, and I think that strengthens Africa's hand considerably. Home thoughts, it's very sad to hear that Nadine Gordimer passed away, and I'd read a fantastic book of hers. I can't remember. I think it's based in Harare, and it's about, I think it's seen through a child's eyes, and it's about the relationship between the child or teenager and the servant, predominantly. Nothing factual that I write or say will be as truthful as my fiction. Talking of Nelson Mandela, he is at the epicenter of our time. Ours in South Africa and yours wherever you are. The gap between the committed and the indifferent is a Sahara whose faint trails, followed by the mind's eye, only fade out in sand. I'm still wrestling with that, actually. In a democracy, the greatest veneration one can show the rule of law is to keep a watch on it, and to reserve the right to judge unjust laws and the subversion of the function of the law by the power of the state. That vigilance is the most important proof of respect for the law. Fair point. I like this photograph, which is entered in the Travel Photographer of the Year award. It's two lionesses going by their lack of manes and a tiny baby lion, and it's so sweet. And this other one I found as well, which was entered in the same competition, the Milky Way. And Lamu currently is hardly anyone's visiting, unfortunately, but we visited a few years ago, and I was thinking of going back again because I met the chap who owns the Majlis, and he told Hannah and I, come here and I'll take you swimming with the dolphins, which we've been wanting to do for some time. However, obviously the news flow has not been that positive. But the point is, look at this photograph of the Milky Way, but we were down there, and there's a hotel called Papone's, and I was sitting, he served some fantastic drink, by the way. I can't remember what it's called. And you could see the Milky Way above your head, and you felt you could touch it. It was just extraordinary. Political reflections. China will dedicate itself to perfecting the role developing countries play in international affairs to give them better representation and a greater say, President Xi Jinping said ahead of a summit of BRICS nations in Brazil. Brazil, China, India, Russia, South Africa are due on Tuesday to sign off on a new development bank being launched by the BRICS emerging market nations. Officials from BRIC nations have said Shanghai will likely be the headquarters, but an official involved in talks on the bank told Reuters late on Monday in Brazil there was still no agreement. China is also planning an Asian infrastructure investment bank. Xi Jinping said the Chinese people love peace in the blood of the Chinese people. There are no genes for invading others or dominating the world. China does not acknowledge the old logic of when a country is strong, it must dominate. Will resolutely pursue the path of peaceful development to proactively seek a peaceful international environment for its own development, and will use its own development to promote world peace, the president said. Put up a photograph of him in Africa. France is setting up an anti-Islamist force in Africa's Sahel. About 3,000 French soldiers will be deployed along with troops from Mali, Mauritania, Burkina Faso and Chad. On Monday, France ended its military deployment in Mali, set up 18 months ago after an Islamist insurgency there. And my conclusions are hard power is a powerful lever with which France and others can tilt the pitch. I'll put up an image of Islamist groups and areas of influence, which I found via the BBC, and then go to the roving eye. Watch this Caliph rip, says Pepe Escobar. He's so reverent, isn't he? So the Caliph is now a global superstar. Ever since Dr. Ibrahim al-Badri of Samarra, a minor Sunni cleric who impersonates neo-medieval Caliph Abubakr al-Baghdadi, showed up the stone pulpit of a Mosul mosque at the start of Ramadan, he's been on a roll. He fully advertised his piece of transnational real estate from the suburbs of Aleppo to Mosul and promised more takeovers. He cut his own video, essentially his own, a monotone rap, dressed in trademark Men in Black regalia. He eliminated the competition, essentially by killing them all. He exalted the Mujahid, inviting them to follow jihad in the name of Allah. He condemned miscreants and hypocrites, exalting the victory of Muslims from the west to the east. Modestly sporting a $7,000 watch or Chinese replica and asking for corrections in his behavior, the Caliph announced that his Islamist State business, former ISIS, is not only about the Levant. Want an IS passport? Just ask the Caliph. Firmly set his sights on conquering Rome. You will conquer Rome and will be masters of the world. Won't happen before Sunday, though, so Pope Francis can watch Argentina against Germany in peace without fear of decapitation, says Pepe. But first, the Caliph seems to be ready to ride his holy camel, shouting Allahu Akbar all the way to Baghdad and then Mecca, which was the point I was making about the redirection. After all, he also proclaimed that the 1916 Sykes-Picot colonial racket-sorry agreement between Britain and France is now null and void. No wonder the House of Saud, that pristine fountain of courage, has already amassed 30,000 troops on their border with Iraq. Until 6 months ago, the Saudis were facilitating an air and bus jihad all the way to both Syria and Iraq. Now they dread the boomerang effect, in case, and that's spot on. Still, the Caliph is all over the place. His Salafi jihadi declaration of independence, not only from historic Al-Qaeda, but mostly those jaded, corrupt Arab monarchies and the Western intel apparatus, which has nurtured international jihad for decades, is indeed groundbreaking. And then talking about the Obama, saying, the Obama administration is contemplating, at least in Syria, the usual Plan A, which is to weaponize both sides, let Arabs kill Arabs. And that's a fact. And it seems pretty incredible that the Arabs put up with it and then carry on fighting each other. No matter his new raw ambition, the Caliph will have to get his act together. A lot of Syrian jihadi outfits have turned against ICE. The same thing is happening in Iraq. Sunni militias are turning against them in Nineveh province. There are apparently rumours of a coup in Iraq. The Caliph, apart from his mighty watch, it concludes, may now hold a lot of weapons and make money by selling oil. That's correct. But his caliphate is a mirage. Only one thing is certain. Before it vanishes into the sands of time, there will be blood. A lot of blood. I'll put up a photograph of Abubakr al-Baghdadi. And I concluded by saying, beware the Abubakers, al-Baghdadi and Shekau. Shekau being the leader of the Boko Haram. Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, however, have decided not to throw in their lot with the Caliph. They say, we confirm that we still adhere to our pledge of allegiance to our Sheikh and Emir Ayman al-Zawahiri. So that's an interesting point. And then I like this sentence from Counterpunch. As advanced societies are depoliticized, the changes are both subtle and spectacular. In everyday discourse, political language is turned on its head, as Orwell prophesied in 1984. Democracy is now a rhetorical device. William Hague tweeted, renewal in politics is good and holding office is not an end in itself. After 26 years as an MP, time will be right for me to move on. Tonight I am standing down as Foreign Secretary after 4 years to serve as leader of the House of Commons. We met, actually, in Nairobi 892 days ago, And I must say I'm very fond of him. Might not agree with all his policies, but I found him very charming. And I'll put up a photograph of him. The day it all started was when he came and spoke at a Conservative Party conference at the time of Mrs. Thatcher, and I remember it very well. President Khamenei, Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, has tweeted a photograph of himself having a friendly conversation with the president and cabinet members. Reuters is reporting that Iran nuclear negotiators are under pressure after the leader made a speech in a public address filled with technical detail. Ali Khamenei said last week Iran needs to significantly increase its uranium enrichment capacity, clashing with the power's push for it to be reduced to minimize the risk of nuclear bomb making. As the July 20 deadline for a deal nears, one Western diplomat at the delegation appeared taken aback by Khamenei's remarks at such a sensitive time in the nuclear negotiations just ahead of the deadline. Two Iranian sources confirmed that assessment. In ostensibly expressing support for the Iranian negotiating team, close scrutiny of Khamenei's speech shows that in reality his remarks were aimed at severely curtailing his team's room for maneuver, making it effectively impossible to bridge the gaps with the stance of the six powers. In our assessment, Khamenei's remarks were not coordinated with the Iranian negotiating team in Vienna at present and were intended to cut off their ability to negotiate effectively. Furthermore, they were aimed at sending a clear message to the international community that the negotiating team does not have the mandate to compromise on the most critical issues under discussion, above all Iran's uranium enrichment capacity. Iran expert Ali Vaez of the International Crisis Group said of Khamenei's speech that drawing public red lines, which is what I think he did, won't help the negotiators to narrow the gaps. Well, he's just saying, the buck stops with him. Euro 136.16, dollar index 80.19. Remember, we hit a 2-month low of 79.74 on July the 1st. Japanese yen 101.60, but the Bank of Japan tweaked the GDP forecast lower. Swissy 0.8920, pound now below 171, 170.84. Aussie below 94 at 0.9391, India rupee 60.185. South Korean won, now that's softened 0.8% to 10.2741. Trimming its years has advanced to 2.3%, touched the weakest level since May the 21st, and a lot of talk about potential intervention. Rial 221.02, the Egyptian pound where it has been for eternity 715.04. And the South African rand, a little bit firm at 1069.78. The dollar strengthened 0.4% in the past 3 months, so it's barely moved. The yen has gained 0.8%, while the euro has weakened 1.2%. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. Yellen is speaking before the Senate Banking Committee today and the House Committee on Financial Services tomorrow, but for now she's been very dovish. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart of that just is hanging in there and showing a lot of resilience. Commodity markets, gold, I'm going to put up a 1-month chart, 1307.97 last. Finally cracked after a 6-week and rather relentless upswing. I think this will give bulls pause for thought. Put up a 1-month chart so you can see how dramatic the fall was. Crude oil, 100.45, very oversold, unless, in my opinion, Iran is now. WTI below 101, I saw it trade below 100. And this is the lowest since May the 12th. Prices remain 2.5% higher this year. I think it's a big buy below 100 in point of fact, or another trade would be to sell $90 puts, 91-day maturity. I think you'll get some reasonable premium for that. Cargo on Ganges and $25 billion Narendra Modi push to unclog India. You'll have to look at rich wrap-ups because that's a tremendous headline, isn't it? And I'll put up a photograph of a boat travelling along the Ganges River in Allahabad. Zambia released photographs of President Michael Sata chairing a cabinet meeting on Sunday, allaying speculation that the 77-year-old leader was critically ill. Sata's spokesperson emailed the photos to the press on Monday, I've got one which shows him arriving for a cabinet meeting at State House, and the other one chairing that very same cabinet meeting. And these photographs were posted on Facebook. Sata's previous post had been 5 weeks ago, fueling talk of his ill health because the page was updated at least once a week before then. The only thing he said was a statement on Facebook: "I am determined to ensure that our government scales up interventions aimed at accelerating rural development in order to improve the people's living standards." The South African all-share is up 11.4233%, not too far off an all-time high set not too long ago. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the sunset in Johannesburg, which had such an end of the continent feel to it. Just remind you, on the 20th of January in the South African all-share is just below a record high. I said in African equity markets will make it a 3-year bull year phenomenon, and I think so far that's been proven right. Dollar versus rand a little bit firmer at 1069.78. Egyptian pound at 715, where it's been for a great deal of time. Egyptian stock market up 25.499% this year. Africa's best rallied 1.28%. And Sisi, as you will see, I think John Kerry and others are headed to Cairo. Egypt essentially put forward the ceasefire that was accepted by Israel. Doesn't seem to have been much discussion with the Palestinians. But the point I'm making is that, Sisi, with his operations in the Sinai, aligned himself with the counter-terrorism meme very early on, and I think he's found strong support from Israel in particular, and this is proof of that. The Egyptian stock market up 25.499%. The Nigerian all-share is at a 2008 high, though it's only up 3.88% this year so far, but I think, it's got more in it. Boko Haram, whose leader AbuBakr Shekau, and I wrote about this, taunted President Goodluck Jonathan with the comment, "I am in your city." And that was in April this year. Demeanor have put out some research about Lagos, boasting a GDP of over $100 billion. Lagos, as a distinct economy, is larger than the entire economies of Ghana, Kenya, or Uganda. The Greater Lagos area is home to over 20 million Nigerians, more than 11% of the country's total population. Local Lagos economy serves as the vital spinal axis undergirding Nigeria's $522 billion economy, the largest in Africa. Boasting a GDP of over $100 billion, Lagos as a distinct economy is larger than the entire economies of Ghana, Kenya, or Uganda, and the economies of US states Virginia, North Carolina, or Georgia. The GDP per capita of $4,000. Average Lagos resident has a higher consumer purchasing power than the average Ukrainian, Indonesian, or the Filipino. In short, Lagos is emblematic of the fast-growing African consumer market. Lagos is simply the terra firma of Africa's economic renaissance. With the confirmed presence of Boko Haram terrorist operations in Lagos, the fundamental risks to the Nigerian economic outlook in 2014 have multiplied exponentially. A major bomb attack in Lagos will accelerate capital market flight, weaken the naira, dent economic growth, reduce corporate earnings, and slash equity market values. I think that's spot on. I've been speaking about it. That's why I kept using that quote. I've been sitting. Jonathan, bring back our army, says AbuBakr Shekau in a very surreal video. The link's on Rich Wrap-Ups, rich.co.ke, then go to Rich Wrap-Up, scroll down, sort of runs sequentially, chronologically. And just watch this video and you will agree that my characterization of Shekau as the taunter was not far off the mark. It really is pretty extraordinary. Then I learned that suspected Islamic extremists bombed a major bridge on a northeast Nigerian highway, further limiting access to base camps in the Sambisa forest, where scores of kidnapped girls are believed to be held captive. The bridge has now collapsed and it is impossible for vehicles to cross over the bridge from either side. And then Shekau saying, we are the ones that detonated the bomb in Abuja, that corrupt city. We are responsible for the bomb in Kano, in Plateau. We were the ones that sent a female bomber to the refinery in Lagos, Shekau says. So he's admitting, and he is largely, he presents a very big asymmetric threat. And go back to that demeanor research, which again is on Rich Wrap-Ups, if you want to really get an idea of what he's talking about. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.489% this year, but you know the problems. They've dropped plans to sell longer-term debt. The SEDI is down 30%. It's generally extremely turbulent. I think it's inevitable that the IMF comes in, and actually the 10-year Eurobond, Ghanaian Eurobond, is trading above 8, I think it's about 8.6%, looks like a buy, because if the IMF steps in, you're going to see a very big rally in that actually, and it's only a question of time when they do. Globally, Luanda in Angola and N'Djamena in Chad are the most expensive cities out of 211 apparently. I like this report on Macau Hub. The port of Maputo is gradually recovering its role as a great transit point for the Southern Africa region. Development of the port of Maputo and the railway lines that link the facility, which is used by companies from South Africa and Zimbabwe, will be great drivers of growth in 2014 through 2018, so the Economist Intelligence Unit in its latest report on Mozambique. Last year, the construction sector saw growth of around 11.3%. Transport grew by 16.1%. Saying diversify the drivers of economic activity beyond coal mining, which as new mines have started operating, has allowed for substantial growth in the ports of Beira and Nacala. The port of Maputo is gradually recovering its role as a great transit point for the Southern Africa region. Cargo that passed through the port of Maputo in 2013, 17 million tons, beat the previous record from 1973. I'll put up that photograph I like of that Maputo evening that I took when I was in Maputo this year. Another photograph of the statue of Samora Machel, which you find in the Praça da Independência, and I think one of the most outstanding examples I can see of that very sort of socialist type art stroke propaganda. Is it a mirage or is it Maputo? Is a photograph I took of Maputo from out to sea about 3 years ago. I like this photograph, Travel Photographer of the Year. It's of a leopard in a tree. Kenya, I wrote over the weekend, the Eurobond gets off to a flyer. On Friday, the recently issued 10-year dollar-denominated government of Kenya bond reached a record low yield of 6.195%. This bond was sold at a yield of 6.875% and a price of 100. Buyers have so far bagged close to a 5-point gain, which in the bond world represents a spectacular return in such a short space of time. The $2 billion worth of Eurobonds, largest for an African sovereign, excluding South Africa, spread over 2 tranches and over 4 times oversubscribed with an order book of 8.8 billion. Was sold, you will recall, less than a month ago. 5-point gains on a bond in less than 20 trading sessions is kind of legendary, and the President, Uhuru Kenyatta, and his Cabinet Secretary should see the price action as strong confirmation of their macroeconomic credentials. I prefer price action over words. The price action has been breathtaking. It would be churlish not to give credit to Madame Lagarde's IMF, which institution has invested heavily in Kenya, Inc., and might well have sprinkled some fairy dust, I said. However, nothing goes up forever, and investors might look to bag gains because we're now entering the bird in the hand territory. The Kenya shilling has also proved real resilient, and my friend on Twitter, Cedric Mohammed, characterized the shilling as the Teflon shilling, which characterization deserved an A star. The shilling has held and bounced off 2.5-year lows at 88.20 on several occasions over the last few weeks. The shilling, whilst down about 1.5% versus the dollar in 2014, remains only behind the Malawian kwacha, which has rallied 8.8% over the same period, when you look at the African Currency League table. Look at John Dramani's Bahamas Ghana, whose macroeconomic credentials have been shredded, and the currency has now fallen 30% and off a cliff in 2014. Teflon shilling indeed, another powerful and bullish signal in the noise. In fact, I have a 48-month forecast of 60 for the shilling versus the dollar. I tested my forecast in a seminar I was hosting for the Mandarini property development in Caliph, just to test the reaction. I will return to that forecast in the near future because it's going to scramble a lot of models, I am sure. Returning to the Eurobond price action, this will surely be a catalyst for wrestling local interest rates lower. The spread between the Government of Kenya dollar borrowing rates and the Government of Kenya local currency rates is like an elastic band that is now stretched too far and will snap back by way of local Kenya shilling interest rates easing. The net liquidity add of $1.4 billion net is yet to transmit through the system, and this will guide rates lower. You will notice that KCB, who last week launched an important collaboration with Safaricom at the intersection point of technology and finance, targeted SMEs 1 million within 12 months, according to Bob Collymore, under the name of Biashara Smart, now have mortgage rates that carry a 12% handle. I saw Standard Chartered came out with an even lower one. I've followed markets from the time I was 9 and in Mombasa and used to wait for my dad's Economist, which would turn up every Tuesday via Wassons, who was a newspaper agent. What I've learned over these near enough 4 decades is that when our mortgage rates reach single digits, we're going to see the next big rally in property prices. The move into single digits is a tipping point, and I've seen it happen all over the world. Property prices rose more than threefold over the last decade in Kenya. I told the Property Mandarini seminar that I'm predicting a similar outcome over the next decade. What about the bifurcation I hear everyone asking as I write this in the early Sunday morning in the wonderfully luminescent green that is Kiambu at this time of year? It is a fact that the coastal insurgency, that's a characterization that Edmund Blair gave it in a recent article in Reuters, has gained in intensity and in virulence. And my concern remains what I wrote on the 3rd of September 2012, where I said my concern remains that what appear like uncorrelated spikes here in Lamu County there another time, and paroxysms of violence conflate, become more broad-based and amplify, and that remains my concern. The Kenya shilling lasted 87.756. Nairobi all share up 10.64% this year, not too far off a record. NSE 20 negative 0.4872% still. Samir is to spin off its tyre subsidiary in a 1 billion shilling deal. That looks quite interesting and probably informs us why Samir has rallied 53.398% so far this year. But there has been a great deal of outperformance by the small caps, of which Samir's one Unga is the biggest gainer, I think, this year. It's quite an interesting story. And when you look at the market cap of these small caps, then you understand why they're quite egregious in many cases.